Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to hear more evidence from Mr. Simon Lawrence of Rydon. So would you ask Mr. Lawrence to come in, please?
Morning.
Good morning, Mr. Lawrence.
Good morning.
Are you all set to carry on?
Yes.
Well, good. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Lawrence, good morning.
Good morning.
Now, yesterday when we finished for the day, we had been looking at the email at RYD 403932, which was sent by Mark Harris to Debbie French, and then her response on the 23rd of April, which included the BBA certificate, and it's up there on the screen for you to see, just as a reminder of where we were. I want to ask you now some questions about the BBA certificate itself. Can I ask you to look at it? It's at BBA, it's HAR 50934. Just take a moment to look at that page. Do you remember reading that document at this time, 23rd of April 2014?
I've seen the document throughout the construction process, so yes, I'd seen it. Yes. Whether it was the actual date or not, I don't know. But
I see. Do you think you saw it before the 23rd of April 2014?
I couldn't say whether it was before or after.
When you did get it, did you read it, do you think?
Not cover to cover, no.
Not cover to cover, right. Did you read it cover to cover at any point during the construction process? No. Can I ask you to turn to RYD 403953? After Mark Harris had received the email from Debbie French and forwarded it to you, you in turn sent on to Mr. Soanes the same day at 17:16 what you had received from Rydon. Bruce, please see attached from Rydon via Harley. I'll catch up with you tomorrow. Can we be clear from that both you and Mr. Soanes saw the BBA certificate for the Rydon PE55 ACM panels?
Well, I assume so.
Looks
I
like
can only
it,
speak for
doesn't
myself, but yeah.
Yeah. Can we then turn to RYD 403964 and look at the bottom of page 1 on that page? This is an email from you, same day, 23rd of April 2014 at 18:22 to Bruce Soanes and Mark Harris. And you say you've been through the info sent to us by Rydon, which I forwarded separately today with PDF warranties, colour charts, etc. And you say, and cross-checked it with your email below. I thought I'd better clarify costings against colour ranges, if only for my own benefit, as I'm getting confused with reference numbers. Now, if you look at the email below on page 2, that shows Mr. Soanes setting out the day before, 22nd of April, the various different types of rain screen panel which could be used at Grenfell. And you can see there, he says, "Hi Simon, for some reason both you and we have overlooked the metallics." We went through this yesterday, because you'll notice that it includes the smoked silver, which was eventually used. When you say you'd been through the documents, can we take it that you'd been through the BBA certificate relating to these panels?
Not in any. I would have had a general look, but I wouldn't have studied each section if that's what you're suggesting.
Right.
And I'm not sure I could understand all of the items within a BBA certificate.
Right. You say that you cross-checked it with the information given to you by Mr. Soanes. What did that cross-check actually involve?
Without, again, seeing the documents, I don't recall that. From memory, I would assume it was relating to colours, etc., etc., but I don't really recall. Right.
What did you understand this certificate was for?
It's a I was going to say an internationally recognised a UK recognised certification for products.
Certification for what?
On various testing regimes on products.
Right. Why did you think Debbie French was sending it to you or to Harley?
I didn't really think about it, to be fair.
Right.
It was just, I would guess, and I don't actually recall my thoughts at the time, but I would guess that it was to prove that it had a BBA certificate and that it had been tested and was appropriate.
Right. Well, we'll come back to that answer in a moment, I think. But can I just pick up something with you in the Rydon Company statement? RYD 3094236. 3094236, please, at page 71, paragraph 159. And at 159 it says, as and when designs were issued for approval from specialist subcontractors, such as Harley's design drawings for the build-up of the facade or the British Board of Agrément BBA certificates from the suppliers, these were passed to Studio E to review, approve, reject, and when appropriate, submit them to RBKC Building Control. Now, the words there are used to passed to Studio E to review, approve, or reject, and when appropriate, submit them to RBKC Building Control. Do you accept that this email we're looking at, or were looking at, suggests that you didn't simply pass the BBA certificate to Studio E, you went through it and you cross-checked it against the information that Mr. Soanes had given you?
No, I think you're reading too much into that email, to be fair. I think that's a turn of phrase. I don't think in fact, I know I didn't line by line go through everything contained within the BBA certificate. Cross-checked, and again, without seeing the whole trail, I would assume it's relating to colours and whether the BBA certificate is, it's an ACM panel rather than we being sent something completely different. But I would not be in a position to technically critique the BBA certificate.
Right. Let's look at the certificate again. HAR 50934, please. And you can see halfway, well, actually a quarter of the way down, under Agrément certification includes, first bullet point, factors relating to compliance with building regulations where applicable. So can we take it from that you saw that and understood that that was the purpose of the certificate?
I understood the general purpose of the certificate being an official test of a product. Whether I'd have read that particular bullet point and thought about that, I doubt it.
Right. Halfway down the page it says key factors assessed, and then the third factor is behaviour in relation to fire. In relation to the building regulations for reaction to fire, the panels may be regarded as having a Class 0 surface in England and Wales and a, quote, low risk, unquote, material in Scotland. See Section 6. Did you read that statement, do you think?
Again, I may have done. I mean, for me, ACM panels, my limited understanding was that, and this is from previous jobs, that the panels needed to achieve a Class O. So, had I have read that, and I may well have done, I don't recall, then that definitely wouldn't have jumped out as any issues.
Right. Did you focus on or understand the words "the panels may be regarded"? Did you have any particular understanding?
I wouldn't have read it. I wouldn't have scrutinised it as we are now.
Right.
No, without a shadow of doubt. No.
You have given us a little bit of insight into your understanding of Class 0 or Class O, as you call it. What did you understand the term Class 0 or Class O to mean at this time?
It's relating to the surface spread of flame and the fact that the product shouldn't promote the surface spread of flame.
Right. But if I were to ask you, what does Class 0 mean and involve? Could you enlighten us further?
As in the testing of?
As in and anything you knew about Class 0
that's
at the time?
About the sum of what I knew.
Right. Was it a term you'd heard on other projects in relation to fire performance?
Yes, in particular paint services in communal areas and on cladding on the previous projects that I'd worked on.
Did you know at the time what tests have to be carried out in order for a product to obtain a Class 0 performance?
No.
Do you know now?
No.
Right. When looking at the certificate and the reference to the word panels, as you can see in the very first dark blue strip at the top, product sheet 1, Rayner Bond architecture, wall cladding panels, did you note that the certificate was said to be addressing the building regulations for reaction to fire specifically?
At the moment, I can't see. Where do you mean on the document? Sorry.
Picking it up in the middle of the page under key factors assessed, which we looked at a moment ago, behaviour in relation to fire, it says the panels may be regarded as having a Class 0 surface. Did you pick up the word panels?
Probably not. I probably would have assumed it was relating to the panels, but I wouldn't have.
No.
I didn't look in that much depth and scrutinise it like we are now. So,
Yeah, it sounds like an old question, Mr. Lawrence. There's a reason for it, I appreciate. Let's go to page 3, figure 1, please, at the bottom of the page there. That's where we see Rayner Bond architecture panels and typical fixing systems. Did you, when looking at this certificate, look at figure 1?
I don't recall.
Would it follow that you didn't note the distinction between the two different systems, riveted and cassette systems, under the rubric Rayner Bond architecture panels?
Sorry, I can see there's two different systems on there now. So, sorry, what was the question?
Well, let me try it a different way. Did you think that both systems were panels and therefore covered by the certificate?
If, and I don't recall going through it in this much detail, but if, without knowing what's happened, I would assume now, if I was reading that applied to both of those face fixed and cassette, because they both have a label that says Rayner Bond panel on them.
Yeah.
So yes, I would assume that. If
Did anything at the time in this certificate lead you to think that the riveted system might have a different fire certification from the cassette system?
No.
Were you ever aware that face-fixed and cassette systems in fact have different fire classifications with different test results?
No.
So you weren't aware that in our Conics Euro test in 2005, the fire performance for the cassette had achieved a Class E Euro score?
No.
Now let's
I
look
think
at...
we mentioned, sorry, I think we mentioned yesterday that I'd only ever had experience of the flat riveted panels.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's right. Now, can we look at page 3, or third paragraph down, under general, so about a fifth of the way down the page. Do you see it says, it's important for designers, planners, contractors and or installers to ensure that the installation of the cladding is in accordance with the certificate holder's instructions and the information given in this certificate. Do you remember reading that?
No, I don't remember the specific wording of the certificate, no.
Did you know generally that as the D&B contractor, you had to ensure that the installation of the cladding was in accordance with the certificate holder's instructions and the information given in this certificate?
I would expect that as a general principle.
Did you ever discuss with Studio E their role in making sure that that happened?
No.
Did you ever investigate within Rydon how Rydon was going to make that happen?
We were going to make that happen by appointing a specialist subcontractor.
Right. A little bit below this statement, we can see that under technical specification, paragraph 1 description, it says the Rayner Bond architecture wall cladding panels comprise 2 half-millimetre thick aluminium alloy sheets, and it goes on to describe what those are. You see, and it goes on. The panels are available either plain-edged riveted system or flanged cassette system to suit architectural requirements. See Figure 1. A Duragloss or PVDF coating available in various colours protects the exposed face. Polyester primer protects the unexposed face. The products are also available in a fire retardant grade, FR. Did you appreciate at the time that whether or not the cladding panels were manufactured in rivet or in cassette form may have made a difference to the fire performance for the purposes of this certificate?
No.
Right. So does it follow that, assuming there was a difference, you couldn't have told that from the certificate? Or you didn't? You didn't appreciate it?
Without rereading it fully now, I don't think it's...
Right.
Well, the snippets we've just seen, I don't think it's clear, and I didn't know at the time.
Did you pick up from the certificate that the panels were available with a polyethylene core as a standard product, but also available with a fire retardant core?
No. I didn't know about any other core to any other ACM panel until after the disaster.
Did you have any understanding about what polyethylene was?
I didn't have not any thought about it, no.
So does it follow that you wouldn't have had any thoughts about its fire performance?
No.
Did you ever ask or check?
No.
In order to perform Rydon's obligations under the contract to make sure that no product was used which contravened the building regulations, as we've seen on the first day of your evidence, did you give any consideration to the fact that the BBA certificate details that claddings were available in an FR core?
No, because I hadn't experienced it before and I hadn't noted that or seen that or read that. My experience has always come from the previous jobs that have been carried out with Rydon.
Right.
And to the best of my knowledge, they're all exactly the same core.
I see.
So I didn't know there was any more variations to the core than what was black, effectively, because it was, and which I believe is the PE.
Can I ask you to go to page 5, please, paragraph 6.1. Here, under the heading Behaviour in Relation to Fire, and there's quite a lot of detail there. At 6.1, it says, a standard sample of the product with a grey-green Duragloss 5000 coating, when tested for reaction to fire, achieved a classification of BS2D0 in accordance with EN 135011-2002. A fire retardant example of the product with a gold-coloured Duragloss finish when tested for reaction to fire achieved a classification BS1D0 in accordance with EN 135001-2002. Did you read that statement? Do you remember?
I don't recall.
You don't recall. Can you look at paragraph 6.2 then, below that? A fire retardant sample of the product with a metallic grey PVDF finish when tested in accordance with BS 4766, 1989, achieved a fire propagation index of 1 of 0, and when tested in accordance with BS 4767, 1997, achieved a class 1 surface spread of flame. Do you remember reading that statement?
No.
At 6.3, as a consequence of 6.1 and 6.2, the products may be regarded as having a Class 0 surface in relation to the approved document B of the Building Regulations 2000 as amended, etc. And then the last sentence says, the unexposed side of the products may also be regarded as having a Class 0 surface. Did you read that paragraph at the time?
I don't recall that either.
So if I were to ask you whether you understood that the statement of Class 0 classification referred to the fire retardant sample or the PE standard or both, could you help me?
Not without interpreting it now.
Right. Paragraph 6.4 then, I think we can take this quickly. These performances may not be achieved by other colours of the product, and the designations of a particular colour should be confirmed by, and then in England and Wales, test or assessment in accordance with approved document B, Appendix A, Clause 1. Did you read that at the time?
Not that I recall.
Would it follow that you didn't read paragraph 6.5 either?
No, I think it's fair to say that I didn't study the document.
Right.
And if I had done, I'm not sure I could have understood all the fire classifications anyway.
Right. Were you familiar at all with the guidance referred to in approved document B?
Not particularly, no.
Not particularly. Well, let's see if I can ask you a specific question. Can I ask you to look at approved document B, which is CLG 50224, please, at page 119. And this is Appendix A, Performance of Materials products and structures, there's a long introduction about performance standards. And this is, of course, approved document B, so this is about fire. And I'd like you to look, please, with me at note 2. Any test evidence used to substantiate the fire resistance rating of a construction should be carefully checked to ensure that it demonstrates compliance that is adequate and applicable to the intended use. Small differences in detail, such as fixing method, joints, dimensions, and the introduction of insulation materials, etc., may significantly affect the rating. Were you familiar with that particular guidance, even as a matter of principle, if not the precise wording?
As a matter of principle, you'd expect the excuse me, you'd expect the products to be suitable. You'd expect the products to need to be installed as per the manufacturer's recommendations. But that's as far as my knowledge would have extended.
Right. I'm not sure that's quite an answer. My question was, were you familiar with the guidance in note 2, at least in principle, if not the precise words?
Well, the principle is what I think I've just explained, but no, I wasn't familiar. I haven't read approved document B.
Right. Okay. Did you ever ask Harley to check the test evidence on which the BBA certificate was based, given that they were the specialist subcontractors on whom you were relying?
I didn't specifically ask them, no, I don't believe.
Is there a reason why not?
Well, I would have thought employing a specialist subcontractor that has the manufacturer's approval, backing, etc., that we would be getting the correct products. So, yeah.
Okay. I mean, we've already seen that Rydon was obliged to exercise reasonable skill and care to ensure that no product was used on the refurbishment of the building which didn't conform with British or European standards, or where there was no standard which didn't conform with the British Board of Agreement certificate. We've seen that. So my question is, given your obligation to the TMO in those terms, why didn't you ask Harley to make sure that these panels did conform with British or European standards and or with the British Board of Agreement certificate?
I don't think that would be normal to ask them a question quite as direct as that. I think by the fact that you've employed a specialist subcontractor, as we've said before, with what you'd hope with the specialist knowledge, or more than hope, you'd have got the specialist knowledge with the backing of the manufacturer. It would be a given that they wouldn't be providing something that wasn't suitable.
How did Rydon manage the risk that Harley wouldn't check the test certificate and make sure that the product was compliant?
Bearing in mind that we'd had several projects and a total of 6 tower blocks that we'd done previously with Harley's and worked with them for the last, since 2006, 2007, I think we were confident in their ability to do what the services they were offering.
So does it come to this? Does it come to this, Mr. Lawrence, that as Rydon was making a solemn and binding promise to the TMO and taking the risk of putting itself in breach of that based on its trust it had in Harley?
The experience it had in Harley, that believing that they were competent.
Right. Do you accept, in the light of Rydon's contractual obligations, that the wording of the BBA certificate that you were sent should have alerted you to the fact that the panels were available with different cores, which had substantially different fire performance?
I think I would, as I'm not technically proficient to understand the BBA certificate, I think we need to rely on third parties to be making us aware of that, including the manufacturers, Harley's, and Studio E if they are aware.
Right. Do you accept that you should have been alert to the fact that the fire performance of a wall incorporating these panels couldn't be ascertained merely by reference to this certificate?
I should have been alerted by our specialist subcontractor, manufacturers, or the design team.
And the same would follow in relation to the differences of fire performance between
Yes.
from colour to colour.
Yes.
Right. And any difference, I would suggest, between rivet system and cassette system.
Yes.
Now, you sent this BBA certificate to Mr. Soanes, as we've seen. Can I just take you back to that email? It's RYD 403953, 23rd of April 2014. We looked at that a moment ago, or perhaps a little bit more than a moment ago now. In the second sentence, you say, "I'll catch up with you tomorrow." Do you remember whether you did catch up with him on the 24th of April 2014?
I may well have done. I don't recall.
You don't recall? You don't recall a conversation?
At that time, we were looking at multiple different types of colours. The mock-up that was put on the building, etc., with the planners. So I may well have done, but
Do you remember whether you discussed the BBA certificate specifically?
I don't recall.
Did you discuss fire performance of the ACM panels specifically? Do you remember?
No.
Did you ever have a conversation with Mr. Soanes about the fire safety performance of the ACM panels, the subject of this certificate?
No, I don't believe so.
Did you ever have a conversation with anybody about the fire performance of these panels?
Not specifically, no.
Right. Can I ask you to turn, please, to RYD 4085? I just want to ask you a question or two about zinc at this point in the story. This is an email from Mike Albiston of Harley to you, dated the 30th of April 2014. And the subject is Grenfell Tower, London, Ned Zinc rain screen cladding. And there are some attachments, including a Proteus HR brochure and various different guarantees, including, or as well as, an HR CWCT document. Hi, Simon. Please find attached the following information from KME for the Proteus rain screen cladding. And you have 3 bullet points. And the third one is CWCT test document from Taywood Engineering. The system is tested to BRE Digest 346, Part 7 for wind, etc. And you have various other test data there for other things as well, but not including fire. Hope this is of some use. How do you ask Mr. Albiston to send you that information?
I don't recall specifically asking for it. I may have done. I remember at the time there was a discussion about the comparing ACM and zinc in relation to durability and lifespan, and that was to do with the going back to the planners with the proposal of ACM as opposed to zinc. So that was a fact finding relating to the durability more than, well, about the durability really was the factor.
So we've seen that you'd already undertaken significant work before this time in order to work out the value engineering options comparing zinc with ACM. Yes.
Significant work, as in we've spoken to Harley's and they've provided us with costs, yes.
Yes. Was zinc still being considered by Rydon at this stage?
I don't believe so, because it was outside the client's budget, and that wasn't what they were intending to do. But what the intention was to be able to have a reasoned discussion with the planners, who Bruce felt were, and I believe Bruce himself was, keen on using zinc.
So was zinc still in play?
It was in play because there was still a planning application based on zinc, so it was in play, but not. It was, in my understanding at the time, it was never going to be an option once they got the cost back.
I follow. All right. Can we go back then to the notes of the induction meeting on the 1st of April 2014? And this is RYD 403683. We looked at this yesterday, 1st of April 2014. Can I ask you to turn to page 2, item 2.1? This is under the heading Proposed Savings Referenced in Tender Submission. And at 2.1, it says there is a potential saving of up to £376,175 that could be realised through changes to the proposed cladding. Savings can be achieved by changing the material and the method of fixing. Changing from zinc to aluminium and using a face fixing rather than cassette would save most money. All changes would have to be approved by the planners. SL, Simon Lawrence, noted that the only noticeable difference in appearance is that you would be able to see some of the fixings if the cladding is fitted using a face fix. PB to organise an introduction between Mark Watterson, TMA's planning consultant, and SL to discuss the proposed changes. Now, I've read that in full to you. Do you recall that discussion?
I knew about the discussion. I don't recall that word for word, but yes, I do. I'm well aware of that, yes.
Yes. So you recall using face fixing and not cassette fixing?
Sorry, when you say using,
Using.
what, the term face fixing?
No, using it as a material on the building.
No, that at this stage it was a proposal.
Yes.
At the stage we're at the moment, the client is saying that they can't achieve the budget without changing to, or moving away from zinc as one of the parts of the VE saving. And within that, there were two options, the cassette or the face fixed.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was the question?
Do you recall specifically the discussion about the choice between whether you used face fix or whether you used cassette?
Yes.
Right, and that was a planning question as well as much as a budget question.
Yes.
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 Now, you were tasked, it seems, with meeting Mark Watterson, who was the planning consultant at IBI or IBI Taylor Young, to discuss the various options for cladding the building. Do you remember whether you did meet him?
I don't think I've personally met him. There was a meeting with the planners, which Mark may have attended, and Steve Blake attended in my absence.
Yeah, all right. Do you know what Mr. Watterson's view was on which cladding system should be used on the building?
I'd have to be reminded via email. I know there's
right.
emails.
Go to RYD 403705, please, and start at page 4. This is an email from Mr. Philip Booth at Artelia to Mark Watterson, dated the 1st of April 2014. And you're not copied in on it. Claire Williams is. Philip Booth says that he's just left an introduction meeting with Rydon, the selected contractor for Grenfell. And he says, we discussed planning permission and discharge of conditions and would like your opinion on the following. 1, Rydon are proposing a face-fixed aluminium cladding system in colours to mirror those submitted for planning. How do you advise presenting this to planners for discharge? Is a meeting required or simply supply materials proposed? And then we can see Mr. Watterson's response at page 3 and 2. If we can have page 3 and 2, or 2 and 3, perhaps better, next to each other, we can see his response on the 6th of April. Starts at the bottom of page 2. Mark Watterson to Philip Booth, copied to Claire Williams, Peter Blythe, Bruce Soanes, and you. Philip, my response is in red below. Please give me a call on my mobile. And then under 1, in red, he answers the question. As you know, we have met the LPA on a number of occasions and presented a range of materials over the course of this project to date. I would recommend that a meeting with them to present early thoughts on materials with physical samples would be appropriate. I would suspect that they will have queries and issues and may well ask for alternatives to be explored for certain proposed materials or colours. So I would also recommend exploring options for the cladding at this stage. An initial thought, I would be concerned if face fixed means visible fixings. So just looking at that, is it fair to say that you, at least by this point, understood that there was a significant risk that face fixed cladding would not be accepted by the planners?
Yeah, agreed.
And you were the representative of Rydon who bore the most responsibility for ensuring that the cladding system was ultimately approved by the planners?
Yes, probably, yes.
Yes. Let's just chase the story about discussions with planning forward a little bit. RYD 404604, please. Now, these are minutes of a meeting with RBKC on the 8th of May 2014, and we can see who's present. You were not present at the meeting, but were copied in on these minutes for information. You can see halfway down the first page there. But we can see that Stephen Blake attended from Rydon. Do you recall the meeting taking place? Do you recall the event, even though you weren't there?
Yes, I recall it took place. I think I was on holiday at the time. So
Yeah, and we can see that Bruce Soanes was there from Studio E. Let's have a look at page 1 at the bottom, at paragraph 1.2, which is the second item in the box under material to facade. It says, a flat panel ACM aluminium composite material was proposed as the cladding material. It was confirmed that the lifespan for this product is similar to that of the product previously suggested. Now, that's what's said. There is a story behind the scenes here, and I just want to explore that with you. Can you look, please, at RYD 404154, first of all? This is an email dated the 6th of May 2014 to the planning consultant, Mr. Watterson, and also to Miss Williams of the TMO, Peter Booth, and Peter Blythe at Artelia, and also to Bruce Soanes and Steve Blake. And you're discussing this meeting with the planners. And you say, under agenda points, as the first bullet point, proposal of material change to the facade from zinc to aluminium composite ACM. And then you say this, put forward our case that ACM is not an inferior product to zinc. In what respects did you think that ACM was not inferior to zinc?
Well, the discussion was about durability and sort of longevity.
I see. Anything else?
No, that was it.
Why?
Zinc is seen to be a fairly luxurious material, so we could understand why the planners and why the architect in particular wished to use the I'd say top of the range, but wished to use the luxurious material. TMO obviously had budget constraints and needed to achieve the savings. So the intention was we needed to make a case for everybody that ACM wasn't a cheap throwaway material in comparison to zinc. So it's relating, my understanding, it's relating to durability.
What factors led you to focus on Let me try that one again. Did you only focus on durability as a factor, or did you look at other things as well when assessing whether it was inferior or not inferior?
It would only be durability and aesthetics.
Durability and aesthetics. Why was the comparison between zinc and aluminium composite limited to durability and aesthetics?
Because that's what the planners would have been interested in. The planners are interested in the aesthetics of a building,
yes,
rather than any other performance. And at that time, we didn't know that there was any difference between zinc and ACM, in particular to fire performance, which is what obviously we're discussing.
And when we talk about durability, from what, in what sense do we mean durable from a planning perspective? Do you mean visually?
Yes, visually. Yes, visually.
I see.
As in ACM will last, ACM's not going to last 2 years, where zinc's going to last 50 or whatever. It's trying to make a comparison to say that it's ACM from a durability point of view isn't a cheap or inferior product.
I see. So the factors governing inferiority or non-inferiority, as you said, were limited to durability and aesthetics.
Yes.
But not fire performance.
No, that wasn't discussed at all, no.
No. When you say put forward our case, did you see yourselves, or did Rydon see itself as an advocate for ACM against a reluctant planning body?
Yes, because we'd used it successfully previously, and for the project as a whole, it was in everybody's best interest at the time, with the knowledge that we had, that ACM was accepted. Otherwise, the TMO may not have been carrying the project forward at all.
Right. RYD 404142, please, is the next document I want to explore with you. This is an email from you to Steve Blake the same day, in advance of the meeting on the 8th of May, to which you were sending Steve Blake. And I think that the purpose of this email, and it's quite a long email, is really to brief Steve Blake, given that he was going to the meeting and you weren't.
Yes.
Yes.
Correct.
Let's look together at the second paragraph. The basis of the meeting is to propose the material change from zinc to ACM, aluminium cladding, and the removal of the external window louvres, so KCTMO can achieve their maximum VE target. Just pausing there, VE is value engineering, I think. What was the maximum VE target that you intended to communicate to Mr. Blake? Was it?
Steve was aware that the ACM phase fixed would achieve the most saving.
I see. And the change from zinc to ACM would help the TMO achieve that target because it was cheaper.
Ultimately, yes, to be able to bring the project within their budget, yes.
Yeah. Now, in the first and second sentences of the email, you say, I get Alison to print out all the attachments above and others relevant to the meeting and put a pack together for you ready for Thursday. The pack will include, and then the second thing is technical information, warranties for Rayno Bond, and photos of Camden and Ferrier for reference if required. What technical info warranties were you referring to there?
I would assume, and I don't recall, but I would assume that was probably relating to Mark Harris's email and whatever was sent from them.
So that included the BBA certificate, did it?
I would assume so, without knowing.
Right. All right.
Knowing what the attachments are.
All right. What did you expect Mr. Blake to do with that information, if it included the BBA certificate?
Just to have them with him.
Right.
Should it need to be discussed, asked for?
I see. And then you go on to say, a little bit lower down, I've been working Bruce Soanes from Studio E. This is in the third paragraph. Our novated architect on details, colours, etc. for the meeting, so I would expect him to lead on our behalf. When you say lead on our behalf, do you mean for Rydon?
Yes, and in fact, probably for the TMO as well.
I see.
Bruce is obviously an architect. Planners are interested in aesthetics and architecture, so they talk the same language.
I see. Would you expect him to lead on any issues of compliance with the building regulations on
with
the TMO's behalf,
with
the planners?
I doubt that probably even come into a conversation with the actual planners.
Right. In the middle of the third paragraph, you say, we've already had quite a lot of debate. Do you see? It's halfway down that long paragraph. Yep. We've already had quite a lot of debate about the shadow gaps, fixing and fabrication details of the cladding panels. So he is more than aware of that there are cost implications of adding in architectural details that, in my opinion, you can't see at height. It's clear from what you say in those emails that in advance of that meeting, Rydon, and in fact you personally, had been substantially involved in discussing the details of the ACM rain screen, which was to be proposed. Is that fair?
The visual details, yes.
The visual details, all right. And then you go on to say...
Sorry, which is what I'm referring to in the bottom part of that bottom paragraph.
Well, I'm going to come to that right now. If you look down at the bottom part, you say, I've listed a couple of items below in relating to the changes which may be useful for the meeting. Cladding. First bullet point, Renabond ACM panels have a BBA certification, class 0 and service life in excess of 30 years. Good appearance should be retained for 20 years. What did you mean, Mr. Blake, to understand by your statement that the ACM panels have BBA certification class 0?
Kind of exactly that, really. Like I say, our understanding, my understanding, and you'll have to ask Steve, was that they needed to achieve class 0, which was a understanding that we gained from our previous experience.
If the discussion with the planners was to be focused on durability and aesthetics, why were you telling Mr. Blake that it would be useful for him to know that these Aranobon panels had a BBA certification for Class 0.
I think that's just me trying to give as much information as possible. I think there's no more. Well, I know there's no more to that than what we've already discussed.
Well, it rather suggests that in fact the discussions, or at least your own or Rydon's own thinking about how to prepare for the discussions with the planners, went wider than durability and aesthetics and would include fire performance.
No, I disagree.
So why else refer to the BBA certification
I think I was just
being
trying to give
Class
him
0?
the full information that I had.
Right.
Planners are not interested in the fire performance. I would suggest they were interested in the visual appearance in the building.
Indeed, which is why I asked my question, why you thought...
I think
Steve
I'm just
Blake-
trying to give him a full, as much information as I had, and give him a full rundown.
Right. You also say in the next bullet point, KALC next door are using powder-coated aluminium cladding, so not an inferior product. Precedent already set! Exclamation mark. What fire classification did the powder-coated panels on KALC have?
I've no idea. I don't even know what panels they are.
Did you know that in fact it was an ACM panel with a styrofoam core, but with mineral wool insulation?
Next door, no. You can just see that it was a powder-coated
Right.
aluminium panel.
What was it about the calc cladding that set a precedent for the Grenfell Tower cladding?
I think generally planners, and again I'm speaking for them, but I think generally planners will, if the surrounding, they'll not only look at the architecture and aesthetics of what you're proposing, they'll look at the surrounding area and the wider plan.
Yeah.
And I think it's always useful that if you've got a brand new building next door that has very similar products, then it sets a precedent for the area.
So an aesthetic precedent.
Aesthetic precedent, yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Not a fire performance
No,
precedent.
I think no.
Did it occur to you that the panels used on calc were not a precedent for the ACM panels for Grenfell Tower, so far as fire performance were concerned?
No, because we weren't talking about fire performance, we were talking about aesthetics.
Now, we can see from your email in general that Studio E was going to be attending the meeting, and indeed did so. Can you help me? Why did you think it was necessary for Steve Blake to be briefed by you on Class 0 if Studio E were also going to be attending?
I don't think there was as much thought into it as you're suggesting. I think it was me filling out an email before I was going on a training course or away to try and give Steve as clear, concise, as much information as possible so he could turn up to the meeting on our behalf.
I follow. Staying on the topic of that meeting with the planners just for a moment, Mr. Lawrence, could I ask you to go to RYD 404221, please? This is an email from Claire Williams of the TMO to you on the same day as the meeting, but after it, 8th of May 2014. Simon, I hope all is well. Steve Blake did a good job of standing in today, answered questions re the system proposed, and could talk through the photos. It was a good session, but the main issue was over the face fixing of the panels. The change in aluminium was played down and did not seem to be a major issue. They asked about the cost differential in terms of the proposal and appreciate that the proposal is the more economic one, but we did not labour this at this first meeting. What did you understand that she meant by the change to aluminium being played down and did not seem to be a major issue?
As in that, well, reading it now, I would assume that they didn't go into a great deal of detail about the comparison between zinc and aluminium.
Right. And I know you weren't at the meeting, but what did you take away from this email about whether there had or hadn't been any discussion about fire performance?
I wouldn't have expected to be any discussion about fire performance.
Continuing with the topic of negotiations with the planners, we just move forward in the story. TMO 1305924, please. and I think we can take this quite quickly. At page 2 of this email run is an email from Sarah Scannell at the bottom, 16th of May 2014, to Mark Watterson, Bruce Soanes and others. You're not copied in on that, but we can see from it that RBKC Planning have said that they were unconvinced that the panels would provide a long-term quality required for such a high-profile building. You see that?
Yes.
And they asked for further examples to go and look at. Now, moving further up the page, we come to another email, same day, from Amy Peck at IBI to Artelia and to Bruce Soanes and Claire Williams. Dear all, do you have any observations on Sarah's email? She seems to be commenting on the appearance of material and the manner of fixings. In Mark's absence, can you advise on whether the materials you've identified can be seen in a better light elsewhere? Is it more of a question of how they've been fitted? Do we have examples? And then moving up the page further, Bruce Soanes responds to her, and this time copies in people at Studio E, but also you. Do you see that?
Yes.
Grenfell meeting attendees. So you now see the email chain, and Bruce Soanes says, "Hi Amy, I have discussed with Simon Lawrence at Rydon, and my view is the obvious next step is to go ahead with the large-scale samples of the aluminium, because I don't think we've exhausted our arguments for composite panels." And then a few paragraphs on down, he says that she looked at Chalcot and conceded that the vast expanse of flat panel that used there is unlike Grenfell, interested in details. And then in the last paragraph, just before the picture of the spandrel, she says, "I'll be meeting Simon on site on Wednesday to discuss selection. There are options which are steps up the cost ladder, which will also be discussed with the client." Do you remember, first of all, having the discussion with Mr. Soanes which led to him sending this email?
I don't specifically remember the discussions, but there are numerous at this time relating to the options for planning. So
Yes. Did you remember whether that discussion came after the 8th of May meeting, which you didn't attend?
I don't recall.
Right. Why did you need to have arguments, as it's put here, for composite panels?
Well, I think possibly not the greatest of terms by Bruce, but we needed to put forward that the wider team needed to put forward that we were still discussing the ACM, the visual appearance of ACM versus zinc.
Right. And the reality is, this is the same as your case, is it, that had to be put forward? The case for ACM as opposed to zinc?
Yes, and I believe, is it Sarah Scannell is one of the planners. She obviously came, I'm not sure if she was in the original meeting or not, but she obviously came back afterwards with further comments.
Yes. Did you consider any of the arguments against composite panels?
From a visual point of view, we were just looking at the visual when we were looking at the client's budget.
Right. Did you take any steps to identify any disadvantages of using ACM panels?
No, I don't believe we did.
No. Did the factors that you considered to be in favour of using the Rainabond ACM panels as part of your case or your argument, did that include, in your mind, your belief that they had achieved Class 0?
At that stage, in my mind, right up until the actual disaster, I thought that they were. We'd used them previously. We'd used them for the. And I'm repeating myself here, but we'd used them for the previous 5 years or whatever it was, or longer on previous projects with no issue and nothing being raised. So I had no concern at that time that they weren't compliant or that there was any issues with fire.
Yes. What I'm really seeking to tease out from this is to what extent the arguments for composite panels included in your own mind the fact that you had...
This is visual. This is these chain of emails is visual and aesthetics and discussions with planners, negotiations with planners.
When you say you don't think we've exhausted, when he says he doesn't think we've exhausted the arguments for composite panels, what arguments did you think you hadn't tried yet with the planner.
I think he's discussing colours,
Right.
and the way panels are, but the junctions, the details, etc. But there was and I don't know when it ended, but there was quite a considerable negotiation with planners and other interested parties about what the final colour was going to be.
Thank you. Can I now turn to a slightly different topic, which is engagement with Renibon's competitors, and start with SEA 3011099, please. And page 3 within that email run, which is an email from you to Mark Harris, among others, dated the 22nd of May 2014 now. Hi Mark, having spoken with Bruce and my client this afternoon, it feels that the first choice is definitely natural brushed aluminium, etc. And then in the second paragraph, about halfway through it, you say, I'm sure Renibon will happily supply the sample material when it comes to it. We haven't engaged with any of their competitors when looking at the samples so far, and we don't intend to, providing they give us the service. I'm not sure Alucobond, Trespa, or whoever will be more than happy to help. Sorry, I read that wrong. If not, I'm sure Alucobond, Trespa, or whoever will be more than happy to help. To what extent did Rydon ever actually investigate using products supplied by Renibon's competitors?
We didn't, and if we had done, it would have been via Harley's.
Right.
This email is referencing other emails where Renibon were suggesting that we would have to pay for a sample, or Harley's would have to pay for a sample of their material. So that's what I'm inferring at the bottom.
Let me just see if I understand that. Can you tell me why Rydon didn't look at any products from Renibon's competitors?
I think at this stage it was known that ACM was the preferred choice, which was also noted in the as an option in the tender and the spec, and it was at that stage down to colours, and also I believe there's Mark Harris. They have a better working relationship with Renibon, so. As far as we'd seen previously from our experience, Alucobond, particularly Trespa, I'm not so sure because I've never used them, but Alucobond produce exactly the same as Renibon. So
yes, I just want to follow up on that answer. You say ACM was the preferred choice, which was noted as an option in the tender and the spec. Was the price that you'd been given by Harley as the saving a price based on Renibon?
I think it was based on Renibon in the end, but I believe that there is a document somewhere where Alucobond is referenced, and I think the price per square metre is exactly the same.
Right, I see. Okay, we'll come back to that if we need to. Now, when samples were ordered from Renibon, and we know they were,
yep.
We know that you discussed that with Mark Harris and others at Harley. Do you remember doing that?
I remember us doing the sample, so yes.
Can we go to RYD 403965 then, please? This is an email to you of the 24th of April 2014 from Mark Harris at the bottom of page 1 on that email string. Morning, Simon. Copy to others at Harley. Replanning rain screen cladding samples material, and then he says, morning Simon, confirm what you've written is correct, and then fourth line down he says, as much as I would like to try and get a bit more money for Rydon and Harley, I think we need to play this one with a straight bat and make the offer as you have done below, as this will give us more of a chance to get it signed off quickly. Now your reply at the top of that, which comes on the same day a little bit later in the morning, Mark, I'm in agreement about playing it straight. If you can find out the additional cost or reduction in saving, depending on how you look at it for the other colours, then at least we will be armed with facts and able to give the client a choice. When you say I'm in agreement about playing it straight, what did you mean?
I think he was talking about. I think at that stage he was talking about different cost, a different scale of cost relating to different paint finishes or different finishes.
Well, what was the straight bat about that, as opposed to a non-straight bat?
I'm just agreeing to his previous email, as in, I don't know what he was offering at the time. So,
Right. Well, he says, I think we need to play this one with a straight bat.
It's relating to paint finishes.
Right, I know he is, but I'm just trying to understand what you understood him to mean when he says, I think we need to play this one with a straight bat. What does he mean by that?
Unless he was inferring that there could be additional savings that Harley and or Rydon could benefit from. And
Right. I mean, what was your understanding of what he meant when you agreed with him?
probably that. I don't really recall the email. So.
All right. Now, we've had some discussion about Chalcots and Ferrier Point.
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence, can we look at that a little bit more closely? If we go first, please, to your statement, RYD 30942220 at page 6. I'd like to look at paragraph 29 with you. And you say there, Rydon asked at least one other party than Harley's to tender for the cladding work. There was not a massive amount of cladding work out there in the refurbishment market, which meant that there were not too many appropriate specialist subcontractors that could be approached. Harley's were not the cheapest contractor at tender stage, but colleagues and I have been impressed by them on other projects and liked their work. Rydon always felt it likely that they would select them to carry out the cladding for those reasons. Now, you refer there to other projects. Were those other projects Chalcots Estate in Camden and Ferrier Point?
Yes.
And just for dates, Chalcots was 2006 to 2009, I think. Is that right?
That sounds about correct, yeah.
Yes, and Ferrier Point, do you remember the dates for those?
2010 to 2000.
2010,
Pre-Olympics,
2011.
so 2010, 2011, something like that.
And other than those two, were there any other projects involving rain screen cladding on a high-rise residential building, other than Grenfell, or prior to Grenfell?
That Rydon had carried out, or in general?
Well, let's start with Rydon carrying out.
Not that I'm aware of, not with rain screen cladding, no.
Right, that to your knowledge, Harley had carried out.
On their... I have to look at their sales literature, but
Right.
I think they've done others, yes.
But those were the two projects that you're referring to
Yes.
when you say other projects.
Yes.
Right. What was your role on each of those projects, Chalcots and Ferrier Point?
Chalcots, I was a site manager at Chalcots, looking after the external works, so that included Harley's and others. And then at Ferrier Point, I think I started as site manager and then progressed to project manager, and that involved looking at, well, Ferrier Point was similar to Grenfell. We were doing more work internally as well, but externally was similar.
Just anticipating some questions which may come later in your evidence, Mr. Lawrence, do you remember on Chalcots whether the building control exercise was done by the local authority or by an AI?
It was by the local authority.
It was. And what about on Ferrier Point?
It was the same.
Same.
Yes.
Now,
Two different authorities, but yes.
yes, indeed. Now, you say you worked as a site manager for the Chalcots Estate project. That involved an ACM rain screen panel system.
Yes.
In that role, were you responsible for the management of Harley's installation of the ACM rain screen cladding?
Yes, that was one of my roles, yes.
And on the Ferrier Point project, you say you worked initially as a site manager and then project manager.
Yes.
In that role, were you also responsible for overseeing the installation by Harley of the ACM cladding?
At Ferrier Point, I was further removed, so I was looking at the whole project at that point, rather than just the ACM.
Right. How did Harley come to be involved on that project?
Sorry, which one?
On Ferrier Point.
Presumably from their work from Chalcots.
I see.
I wasn't involved at the very initial stages of Ferrier. I was still at Chalcots as Ferrier was design-wise and contractually-wise getting going.
I see. From your own knowledge, and if you can't help us, you can't help us, but did Harley get the Ferrier Point subcontract job because of the work they'd done on Chalcots?
I would imagine so, yes.
You imagine so, but do you know?
I don't know for
You don't,
certain because
right.
I wasn't involved at the time.
Did CEP have any involvement in either of those projects? Do you remember?
Definitely Chalcots.
Yes.
Yes, I believe they did at Ferrier as well.
Right. And how did they come to be involved? Do you know?
They were a fabricator of Harleys. I think windows, well, in fact, I'm sure windows as well as cladding.
Right. When you say they were a fabricator of Harleys, what do you mean by that?
Well, Harleys went to them for the materials.
I see.
They're a supplier, sorry.
Supplier.
They fabricate as well, but a
Right.
supplier.
Okay. And I'm sorry to jump around on this topic for a moment, but did you ever see any supply contract between CEP and Harley for the Grenfell Tower rain screen?
Not that I recall, no.
All right. Now, focusing on Chalcots, can I turn to the Rydon Company witness statement, RYD 3094236, at page 26, please, and I'd like you to look at paragraph 46 on that page. It says, initially the fixed rain screen cladding was an ACM cladding product called et al. Bond, but this was replaced. This is Chalcots, I should say.
Correct.
It starts the page before, and then it goes on in the third line. The rain screen cladding was replaced with Renabond polyethylene PE ACM in 2010, i.e. the same cladding that was used for Grenfell Tower. CEP were the supplier of the replacement product. The cavity barriers at Chalcots were full-width horizontal perforated metal intumescent cavity barriers rather than the open-fronted intumescent cavity barriers used at Grenfell Tower. Now, just focusing on the same cladding that's said there, according to paragraph 46 here, the original et al. Bond ACM was face-fixed. Was that also a polyethylene core?
Oh, I believe so, yes.
Right. And its replacement was Renabond PE55. So was that exactly the same as at Grenfell Tower?
I believe so.
And you say that, well, it says that that it was CEP who supplied the replacement product. And to be clear, was the replacement product supplied by CEP a face-fixed panel, or was it a cassette panel?
No, it was a face fixed.
At Grenfell, though, it's right, isn't it, as we know, that the ACM panels weren't face-fixed, they were cassette, weren't they?
Correct.
So they weren't the same product, were they?
Well, the same material.
Ah, but not the same product.
Well, I think you could replace. I think we're possibly splitting hairs there, but it's the same material.
You say we're splitting hairs, but if the difference in fire performance between face-fixed and cassette,
which we weren't aware of, but yes,
I note your answer on that, was, as we now know it to be, that wouldn't be splitting hairs, would it?
not in that case, no.
Now, in your time on the Chalcots project, after January 2008, which is the date of the BBA certificate we saw earlier this morning,
Right.
did you look at that certificate for Renabond PE55 in the context of that project?
No.
No. Now, at paragraph 51, over the page in the Rydon Company statement, say page 27, you see at paragraph 51, it refers to a fire at Taplow House on the Chalcots estate on the 16th of January 2012. And just for context, Taplow House, I think, is one of the 5 tower blocks on the Chalcots estate,
Correct.
isn't it?
Yeah.
And it says in the 4th line down, the fire-damaged panels were replaced by the same material, namely Renabond ACM with a PE core. You see that? And again, the material was face-fixed, not cassette. That was it would have been like for like, would it? Now, can I ask you to look at the fire damage report from the Abseil survey document for that incident? It's at CEP 503223. And it's dated the 23rd of January 2012. If we look at the second page, I think we can see that. That's the date of the report. And the date of the inspection, as you can see there, was Tuesday the 18th of January. And the distribution list for this document was Steve Blake and Ray Bailey and Daniel Anketel Jones. So it goes to Rydon as well as Harley. Are you familiar with this document?
No, I don't think I've ever seen it.
Right. All right. Well, let's see how we go. Can I ask you to be shown page 5, please? We can see photographs there which show rivets. So we're clear from this that this was a face-fixed rain screen system.
Correct.
Now, in the Rydon Company statement, also in paragraph 51, if we go back to that, it says at paragraph 51 at the end, as far as RML, that's Rydon, is aware, there were no concerns raised with the performance of the cladding or that the PE grade ACM panels were unsafe or non-compliant with the building regulations. Was that your understanding as well?
That was my understanding. I wasn't involved in the Taplow House post-fire works, but that was my understanding. Yes.
Right. Okay. Well, we may, if I were to ask detailed questions about that fire, given that you hadn't seen this document before, it sounds as if you're not the right person to ask.
Probably not. I would have thought Steve is probably the person to ask.
All right.
Simon O'Connor, I think, possibly carried out the remedial works related to that.
Did you make a visit to Taplow House after the fire to inspect the damage yourself?
No, don't believe so.
You didn't. So were you aware at all in the investigation into the extent of the damage or what had caused it?
I think, well, only from talking to Steve, but
Right.
not actually visiting, seeing reports from, no.
Okay. Let me then ask you about Ferrier Point, 2009 to 2011, or 2010 to 2011. If you go back a page, please, in the Rydon Company statement, I think we've seen this already. It says that, at para 49, that as with Chalcots, ACM cladding was used, the only difference with this being that a Lucabond rather than a Rainobond was used. Is that your understanding, that actually on Ferrier Point it was a Lucabond, not Rainobond?
Correct, yes.
Right. Was the Lucabond also polyethylene core?
I would say so, yes.
And do you remember whether the panels were face-fixed or cassette?
I believe they were face-fixed.
Face-fixed again. Right, okay. If the ACM panels used at Ferrier Point and indeed at Chalcots were face-fixed and not cassette, can you explain how you could take comfort from the past use of face-fixed at both of these projects when choosing the material for the rain screen at Grenfell Tower?
Because we didn't know that there would be any difference between having the same material, one that's flat and one that's folded.
Yes.
So as I suggested a minute ago, I would understand that to be the same product. And I know we've explored that it's not, but because it's exactly the same material.
Yeah. Can I ask you, Mr. Chairman, I've got about maybe 10 minutes more on this topic. Would it be convenient to continue?
Yeah,
for
I think that would be all right. You're happy to keep going for another 10 minutes? Yes.
Right. Can I ask you then to move to paragraph 103 of the same document, Rydon's Company Statement, at page 51. And this is under summary in relation to the original design and scope of work. And at 103, we can see that both the Chalcots and the Ferrier Point projects, it is said that the ACM cladding had been installed over mineral wool insulation. Do you agree?
Yes.
Did you know that fact at the time you were discussing the use of ACM at Grenfell Tower with either Mr. Soanes or the planners or Harley?
That we'd used mineral wool previously?
Yes.
Yes.
You knew that fact? You were aware of that, were you?
I knew that we'd used mineral wool previously, yes.
Right. Can I ask you to look at RYD 409105? Now, this is an email from you to Tom Elliott of Rockwool on the 18th of June 2014. We can see lower down the string, taking this quickly, you'd been introduced to him by Claire Williams. We can see that if you want to. If you want to turn the page just to see how this came about. The introduction came from Claire Williams, and then you communicate with him on the 18th of June in the email at the top of the page. We can see that you told him that Rockwool had been used on all previous tower block refurbishments with Harley. You see that?
Yes.
So can we take it that in mid-2014, you were aware that Chalcots and Ferrier points were cladding systems using PE core rain screen over mineral wool as the insulation material?
Yes.
And therefore not over PIR or phenolic insulation material?
Correct.
Was that distinction one which had occurred to you at the time?
Not specifically. Not when we might be going off slightly off topic or coming on something else, but not when I knew that there was Celotex was proposed. I just saw that Rockwool and Celotex were both major national, if not international, players in the insulation market, and I just assumed that they were like-for-like products, even if they're not the same material.
Right.
Performance-wise, that is.
Do we take it from that answer that at this point, June 14, you were conscious that the insulation proposed for Grenfell Tower was FR5000, Celotex FR5000,
Yes.
which became RS5000?
Yes.
Okay. Was the purpose of this email then to explore whether Rockwool should be used in place of the specified FR5000?
This email trail all came about from Rockwool making a sort of an unsolicited sales pitch, and it, I think, further followed because they were offering some eco funding or the ability to use Rockwool,
right.
and
Right.
therefore attract some eco funding.
I see. So do we take it from that answer that it hadn't come about because of your concern about whether PIR was suitable?
Correct.
Now, did you give any consideration to the fact that your previous use of polyethylene cored ACM panels as a rain screen had been over a different insulation product, namely Rockwool at Ferrier Point and Chalcots, when you were considering its suitability for the Grenfell Tower project?
Not overly. Apologies to repeat myself, we've received a tender with the specification in it, with our specialist subcontractor that's seen that specification, priced against that specification, has not raised any concerns, and I don't believe any other tender has raised any concerns at the time either regarding the specification. So this email is purely relating to Rockwool making a sales pitch to use their product over their competitors, Celotex, or any other competitor.
Did it occur to you, as I've already touched on this a moment ago, did it occur to you at the time that when you were looking at the rain screen system as a system, it was different from Chalcots and Ferrier Point because it was ACM over PIR as opposed to ACM over mineral?
Only the fact it was ACM over a Celotex product as opposed to a Rockwool product.
Did you take
the actual content of the product? No, I didn't know I didn't.
Right. Would it follow that you didn't take any steps, therefore, to verify that the cladding system as a system, PE, ACM panels and PIR insulation, was equally suitable and safe?
I relied on my specialist subcontractor,
Right.
who had the technical knowledge to be able to tell me that.
Right. Mr. Chairman, there's a mini topic to come, but I think...
Would that be a better point?
It probably would be now.
All right, good. Right, Mr. Lawrence, we'll have a break now, please. Usual injunction, don't talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out of the room. we'll come back at 25 to 12, please.
Thank you.
Good, 25 to 12, please. Yes, would you ask Mr. Lawrence to come back, please? Right, ready to continue,
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence? Good. Mr. Millett?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Lawrence, I just want to investigate with you a little bit the discussion about ACM at Chalcots. Do you recall that in 2017, the first part of 2017, there was an issue at Chalcots Estate in that the ACM product, which had been used on the rain screen there, was delaminating?
I only know from the evidence that I've seen, but no, I didn't know at the time.
I see. Were you involved in that issue at all?
No, I was long gone from Rydon then.
But let me see how far we can get with that. You had gone. So you don't have any recollection of Mr. Whirler of Alcoa?
No.
No. Well, perhaps we should ask others about that. Now, turning to the difference we were talking about before the break between face-fixed and cassette, that's the topic. Can I start by asking you to look at SEA 30111033? And this is an email of yours of the 23rd of May 2014 to Bruce Soanes and Claire Williams, copied to Mark Watterson of IBI, about the cladding, and it responds to Mr. Soanes' email to you of earlier that day that we can see at the bottom of page 1. He says to you in that email, and to Claire Williams, if we send the planners to see the example, this is the third paragraph down, they will jump on the fact that it's cleanable face fixings with rivets mostly concealed in return faces to the joints. I know you've prepared cost options to do this, but I've prepared a sketch attached showing how the ACM could be assembled as cassettes, or perhaps as a hybrid, which I'm less convinced by. I don't think you need the rest of that. And then you respond to him a little bit, well, not long actually later, the same afternoon, and you say, thanks for taking a look at this earlier today. I'm glad it was as good in the flesh as the pictures. Obviously, the cassette versus face-fixed is a discussion which will need to be made initially by KCTMA before it is presented to planners, because, as we spoke about on Wednesday, there is a substantial amount of cost difference between the two options. I believe this could have great bearing on the affordability of the scheme and justification of the spend to their residents. Is it fair to say that you are at this stage trying to set out the case for face-fixed or riveted cladding?
The whole team was, because
Yeah.
it provided the most budget saving.
And that's because it was the preferred option, because it was cheaper?
Based on cost, yes.
Yeah. Now, it looks as if Mr. Soanes thought that cassette was more likely to appeal to the planners because of the appearance. Was that the debate?
Yes, it did appear to be, yes.
Yeah. And you go on in the second paragraph, as we see, to ask Claire Williams to say whether she thinks that showing the planners cassettes is a risk. You see that?
Yes.
What was the risk?
That if she showed them cassettes, I think here we were talking, so we're talking about them going and seeing another Renabond building as installed, and if showing them cassettes, would they prefer that over face fix?
Right.
So did she just want to show them face fix options first?
Was the risk that you're talking about here, the risk that seeing cassettes might persuade the planners that they were preferable to face fixed?
Yes.
They look nicer.
Yes.
Right. And therefore there's a risk that the more expensive option might be picked.
Correct.
I follow. And again, can we assume from your answers earlier today that no consideration was given to the fire safety of these two options compared with each other?
Correct.
Next document, RYD 405064, please. This is an email from you to Steve Blake the same afternoon, a little bit later on that day, and also to Zach Maynard, and in which you express your concern that the client may choose cassette fix cladding over face fix because of the planning risk.
Correct.
And the figures you go on to talk about in the second line are as follows. You say, this gives us a benefit of 126,259 rather than the preferred face fix option, which will generate 200,798 pounds benefit. I'm giving it my hardest sale pitch as we speak. Come on, the Essex boy patter. The benefit are the benefits of the savings to Rydon that you were not planning to pass on to the TMO, weren't they?
I believe so, yes.
Now, can we look, please, at the same time, if we can put next to that RYD 404204, and this is Zach Maynard's email to Steve Blake on the 8th of May 2014, so a little bit earlier in the month that year, where you can compare the figures and you can see that the differences between the Harley savings and the Rydon savings, as between face-fixed and cassette versions, are almost identical to the figures in this 23rd of May email that you sent to Mr. Blake. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. And then going back to left-hand side where you say, I'm giving it my hardest sales pitch as we speak, come on the Essex boy patter. Can we take it from that you were trying to drive down the cost for value engineering purposes by pushing face-fixed, but the planners were likely to go for cassette because of the look of the thing? And yes, I see. And you were doing that in order to maximise Rydon's own financial position.
That was part of it, and part of it was for the client, but yes.
Yeah. Can I then turn away from those two documents to SEA 000-11069, moving forward in the story, 2nd of June 2014. This is an email from you to Mr. Blythe, Peter Blythe of Artelia, and also to Bruce Soanes, copy to Claire Williams and Philip Booth, he's Artelia, re Glenfell cladding proposals, and there's a long second paragraph, and I'll just read a part of it to you. The summary to date is that following the planners' meeting and their visit to Chalcots, both Bruce and myself have been working on selecting the type of cladding, i.e. the colour and texture, which we feel will be in line with what the planners are after. We've also been carrying out design work on the mock sample that we will fix to the building and present to the planners. The first choice of cladding is a Rydon natural brushed aluminium. So that confirms at this point that the biggest savings were to be made by using face-fixed ACM from Rydon and not cassette, yes?
Correct.
And again, at this point, nobody had alerted you to the potential differences in terms of fire safety.
You wasn't aware of them.
And had Harley had any input into this debate about face-fixed as against cassette at this point?
Well, they were involved in all the providing, and Rydon were providing information as to where their products have been used elsewhere that the planners could see. They were involved in the details. This is Harley were involved in the details of how the mock-up was to be put together. So yeah, everybody was involved.
Okay. Can I then turn to a slightly different subject, which is Carl Stokes and his fire risk assessment? Do you recall that Carl Stokes had carried out a fire risk assessment in the October of 2014, so a little bit later than this debate about cassettes and face fix?
I recall him being around. I don't recall the document if we've ever seen one. So.
All right. Can I ask you then to go to his report of that year? It's TMO 100-12526. And I'd ask you, please, to look at this, first of all, which is his record of significant findings and action plan. Just in general terms, were you familiar with the fire risk assessments which had been historically produced by Carl Stokes for this building?
No, I don't think we were, no.
All right. So this forms part of a report for October 2014, which he'd given to the TMO. Can I ask you to put pages 10 and 11 next to each other? And this is part of the of his record of significant findings, which we've seen on page 1. And if you look at the bottom of page 10, and this is 17th of October 2014, you can see that he has identified at the bottom of page 10 item number and it's priority high in red. You see that?
Yes.
And the identified risk here is external walls. It starts at the bottom of page 10 and goes over to page 11. Do you see it says, and it's red, high, the external face of this building is to be overclad. The piece of cladding fixed to the external wall at the moment is on timber battens. And then the recommendation under actions to be taken, he says, I would recommend that the contractor provides, one, the scope of works covering how this cladding, how will the cladding be fixed to the building, what fixings will be used, and then three, the fire rating of the cladding and the fixings, and four, the building control officer's acceptance of this fixing system and the cladding used. And it's to be completed by Claire Williams' query. Were you, to your knowledge, personally ever asked to provide the information that is sought there?
By Carl Stokes or by Claire?
By anybody, by Claire Williams or Carl Stokes, or anybody?
I don't recall. I don't recall being specifically asked. No.
Right. Are you able to help with what Mr. Stokes might have meant by the fire rating of the cladding and the fixings?
Able to help, I think. I'm not sure what I can add to what he's already written, really.
Well, let me try it this way. Was the expression fire rating one which you were familiar with when used in the context of an external wall construction?
I think fire rating is a general term within overall building. So, yeah, it's a term.
Right.
I'm not really understanding what you mean.
Specifically, do you remember Claire Williams ever turning to you at this time and saying, what is the fire rating of the cladding and the fixings?
Related to the ACM, no, I don't remember that at all.
Do you know whether anyone else in Rydon was asked that question by Claire Williams?
I don't recall. They may have been. I don't know.
Or anybody else at the TMO?
I don't recall that.
Do you remember whether Rydon, or you specifically, ever asked building control whether the cladding system was acceptable as per paragraph 4 in his action to be taken?
Well, we did by the building regulations and building control application via our supply chain and designers.
Very well. We'll come back to that topic later. Can I then turn to a completely different topic, which is Celotex RS 5000, which we touched on just before the break this morning. Can I take you first, please, to the NBS specification, which is SEA 50169 at page 73. And I'd like you to look with me, please, at H92776 at the very top of the page. Thermal insulation, and you can see there that the Celotex FR5000 was what was specified for use on Grenfell Tower. Yes?
Yes.
It does say that, and that then formed part of the employer's requirements, as I think you confirmed
Yes.
before. And looking at the detail, you can see what is specified. Material, 0 ADP rigid polyisocyanurate insulation board, BRE Green Guide rating A+, manufacturer Celotex, and then there are some dimensions. But the first bullet point before that, product reference FR5000 aluminium foil face both sides, and then thickness and required performance. I'm not going to read it all out to you. My question is, had you read the specification on this topic at any particular point during your role at Grenfell Tower on that project?
I'd been through the specification, yes, but
did you focus on this part of it? Particularly?
I don't think particularly any more than any other, no.
What knowledge of FR5000 as a product did you have before starting your time on the Grenfell Tower project?
None, as far as I'm aware.
You had no knowledge of it?
FR5000 doesn't ring any bells of...
Right. It's not a product you've used before, is it?
Celotex and or rigid insulation boards, yes, we've used before, and yes, I've seen.
Right.
FR 5000 didn't mean anything to me.
Right. Can I ask you to look at SEA 402275, please? This is a budget, and it was created by Harley on the 18th of October 2013 for the Grenfell Tower project. Now, obviously, at this time, this is even before the tender process had started, so you would not have been involved at all at this point. Did you ever see this document when you did come into the project?
No.
Have you ever seen it before?
No.
Right. Let's see how we go with it then. Page 1, Rainobond zinc rain screen spandrel cladding. You see that?
Yes.
2 items down
Yes.
in the list. And then 7th line down, Rainobond zinc rain screen columns and casings and insulation. And then 8th line, composite precast concrete column cladding and insulation. You see that there?
Yep.
At any stage after you became involved in the project, did you ever discuss with Harley the choice of FR 5000 as a product?
It was only the only conversations that were had and documented were relating to the sales email from Rockwool and passing that backwards and forwards relating to eco funding.
Right, I see. Okay.
Apart from that, no.
Can I then ask you just about U values for a moment? Can you please be shown SEA 3011581? And this is a set of minutes from the design team meeting number 2, at which we can see you were present, among other people, Simon O'Connor, Neil Crawford, and others from Harley as well, and Mr. Sain's not there. And if you turn, please, to page 4 and go to item 3.62, we can see that there was a discussion about U values. It says that U values were discussed with Simon Lawrence, asking how the figures in the spec were arrived at and whether they need to be rechecked from an M&E and insulation point of view. Note insulation there. Is the insulation thickness shown on architect drawings correct? DAJ, that's Daniel Ankleton Jones from Harley, confirmed that he had checked them, but with the assumption that Rydon, RML, were fitting further insulation internally. SL didn't believe this was part of the spec. All parties agreed to check their documents. And then there's a post-meeting note which says Max Fordham tender U-value document was shared to team via email. External wall construction was checked against all tender information and all information shared. Why was it that you wanted to check the U values at that moment, that time? So this is September 14th.
I would suggest by that Harleys are wanting to know the U values that need to be achieved, so they can check the thickness of the insulation that needs to go externally.
Right. When it says in the post-meeting note, external wall construction was checked against all tender information and all information shared, did that include, well, let me ask, did you check the external wall construction designs against the tender information?
I don't know what was involved in that.
When it says
what precise documents, I haven't got any record of what precise documents were checked. But I wouldn't necessarily have picked, I would assume, wouldn't necessarily pick up drawings to see what was on the drawing. Well, we may have picked up the drawings and looked at the drawing to see what was being shown on that against the MBS spec, against Max Fordham's spec.
Right.
But we're looking at thickness there.
Yes, I see that. When it says external wall construction was checked against all tender information and all information shared, who was doing the checking and who was doing the sharing?
Well, I don't recall. I would guess that's the Royal. That would be Studio E, Harleys, and possibly ourselves.
Okay. Now, I just want to ask you one or two questions about Rockwool while we're on the subject. Can I ask you to go, please, to RYD 406697? This is in the context of your evidence earlier, yesterday, I think, when you mentioned eco-funding. And just before we look at the detail of this, we're in June 2014. At that point, Mr. Lawrence, did you still think that a grant for eco-funding was an important aspect of the way in which cost savings could be achieved for the project?
Yes, I believe we were still investigating then what options there were.
Right. Now, here's an email chain between Zach Maynard of Rydon and Tom Elliott of Rockwool. And it starts a little earlier down the chain. And the date range for this is the 4th to the 10th of June 2014. And there's a discussion about eco-funding in it, in the context of the possible use of mineral wool. And at the top of the chain, we can see that Zach Maynard sends this whole chain to you on the 10th of June 2014 with FYI. Do you recall receiving this email chain and seeing the discussions that had eventuated between Mr. Elliott and Mr. Maynard?
I remember there being discussions about the eco-funding. I don't remember this specific email any more than any others.
All right, well, let's see how far we get with your recollection of it. If we look at the page next, the next page down, page 2, we look at his email of the 4th of June 2014. This is Tom Elliott to Zach Maynard. If we look at the third paragraph there, it says, all stone wool insulation comes with a Euro class fire rating of A1, and therefore our systems are particularly suited to high-rise and school refurbishment in accordance with BR 135 and BB 100. These systems also include the unique 4-in-1 benefits of Rockwool products: fire protection, acoustic performance, highly durability, and fully recyclable. And so that's down the email chain. Did you notice that, or pick that information up when you read this email chain that Zach Maynard sent you?
No, not particularly, no.
Did you have any discussion with Zach Maynard about what Euro class fire rating was applied to stone wool?
No, because I don't think I would have understood that.
Right.
And I wouldn't expect Zach to either, particularly.
I see. So you had no understanding of what Euro class A1 meant?
No.
Right.
I see that purely as a sales email.
Did you not pick up the fact that clearly, even as a sales email, Mr. Elliott regarded it as important for you to know that the insulation, being stone wool, had an A1 fire rating and therefore was particularly suited to high-rise?
No, I just read that as it is. I don't read too much into that. I read that as a sales email. And I believe that got passed on to Harley's eventually anyway.
It may be a sales email, Mr. Lawrence, but was it not important to notice at the time, or did you notice at the time?
I don't think
this
I
was
did, no.
Right. So do I take it from this exchange that you really just dismissed it as a sales email rather than paying close attention to what was in it?
I think we passed it on to Harley's, but there are a lot of, you get a lot of approaches from manufacturers wishing to use their products, obviously on construction projects. So Rockwool was somebody that we knew because we'd used them previously, but we didn't know that there was any, or was aware of any difference between one or the other, as far as any fire performance, safety, or anything else.
Can I ask you to look at page 1 then, in this email chain, which is Mr. Elliott's email of the 10th of June 2014 to Zach Maynard, immediately under what Zach Maynard copies to you 2 minutes after he receives it. He gets it at 2:12:04, he pings it on to you at 12:06, and he says, "Hi Zach," second paragraph, "thanks again for the information. I noticed on your website that you are planning on attracting eco-funding to the project. and thought it important to make you aware that the only insulated rain screen cladding system available at the moment which attracts eco-funding is our Rockwool Duo slab. The reason for this is that in order to attract eco-funding, the systems being used must have Ofgem appropriate guarantees against them, and we have worked with a specific guarantee provider to arrange our guarantee. The system is a combination of Rockwool dual-density insulation and rock panel lightweight cladding, both of which have superior fire ratings of Euro Class A1. Do you remember reading at least that part of the email chain?
I remember the email chain, and I remember it being a sales pitch from another manufacturer offering to assist with eco-funding. And I remember we took the email and we passed it on to Harley's and we investigated that.
You did? You did indeed. I'm going to show you that now. RYD 407567. Because we can see your reaction here. Simon Lawrence to Zach Maynard, following day, early in the morning, 11th of June. Something for the Harley inclusions. Make sure they use appropriate insulation to achieve grant funding. They normally use duo slab anyway, so shouldn't be an issue. But what did you mean by Harley inclusions there?
As part of the Harley order.
As part of the Harley order.
I think we were looking. To go back to back, or to reference the eco funding exploration in our contract with Harley's.
Right.
So an inclusion in their contract is what I'm getting to.
Oh, I see. Does that mean that you wanted Harley to select and use appropriate insulation to achieve grant funding?
If grant funding was available, and we were able to use it, and at that time I'm thinking it's just a like-for-like swap from Celotex, so from one manufacturer to another.
Right.
Then we would ask Harley's to, if it was a like-for-like swap and it was as simple as that, then we would want Harley's to use the one that would attract all grant funding for the client.
That would mean switching away from RS 5000 to Rockwool or some other mineral wool, would it?
Or whoever or whatever product that had that attracted the eco funding.
Right. Now you say I'm thinking it's just a like-for-like swap from Celotex. Did you think that Celotex? Well, we try it this way. In what respect did you think that Celotex and Rockwool were like-for-like?
The fact they're insulation materials. That's kind of as the extent of my thought process about the insulation.
Given the email chain we saw earlier said, and it's here indeed in this one as well, that Rockwool has a fire rating of Euro Class A1, did you address your mind to the question of whether Celotex FR5000 also had a fire rating of Euro Class A1?
No.
So your like-for-like comparison did not extend to one of the features which Tom Elliott was drawing to Mr. Maynard's attention, namely its superior fire rating.
I think, as I've just answered, we wouldn't have understood or known the classifications and quite what they meant anyway. We saw that. I see that as a sales email with one large manufacturer trying to get their product used on a building from a sales point of view. Did we read, digest, research every part of that sales email at that time? No, we didn't. In hindsight, knowing what we know now, then that might be a different matter. Yeah. But at that time, no, it's a sales email. It's one of 80, 100 emails that comes in a day that you're trying to deal with, and you're trying to deal with it on the basis of you may be able to get some eco funding, secure some eco funding for the client.
It was clear, wasn't it, from that specification that Rockwool wasn't going to be used?
Sorry, from which,
well, it was,
which specification?
Did you think that the specification for insulation could be changed from RS FR5000 to Rockwool if you got an eco funding grant?
Yes.
Yeah. Did you give Mr. Maynard the instruction that you give him, namely something for the Harley inclusions, because you thought that Rockwool would attract the funding that you thought was essential?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think, does it follow that you hadn't taken any steps yourself to understand the fire performance of the Rockwool system before you asked that the Rockwool system form part of the Harley inclusions?
I don't know the timing of the emails compared to what we sent to Harley and asked them to investigate it. It was on that I'm raising a point that if that does provide funding and if it's suitable,
Yeah.
I'm not making assumptions. I'm not saying it's suitable. Then we would ask Harley's to be included in their contract, so they did use Rockwool.
Right. Is there any sense in which we should read your email to Zach Maynard as saying that that in order to achieve grant funding, it was important to ensure that you used fire-safe insulation? Or was that not part of the thinking?
No, that's not part of the thinking.
Right, I see. Now, when you say here in the email, they normally use duo slab anyway, so it shouldn't be an issue. So you say that.
Yes.
Were you referring to your previous experiences with Harley?
Yes.
And specifically in relation to the cladding system at Chalcots and Ferrier Point?
Yes.
So duo slab was a mineral wool used on those projects. I think you confirmed that earlier.
Yes.
Yes. So is it fair to say that at this time you didn't think it would be a problem for Harley to follow the requirements for eco-funding, which have been described in the emails we've just been looking at here?
No, I didn't know if I didn't know if it would be a problem. We needed them to investigate that. But
right,
what I didn't want is we didn't want, if there was an option on the table to use one manufacturer that gave the client some funding, we wanted that, providing it was appropriate, put in the contract with Harley's, so
right.
They didn't have a better buy scenario and then go somewhere different.
Right. The email suggests changing, or possibly changing, the insulation, but doesn't suggest changing the rain screen.
Correct.
Given that the email from Tom Elliott to Zach Maynard said in the first main paragraph, that I've read out loud to you, that the only guarantee would come if you used rock panel lightweight cladding as the rain screen, what thought did you give to changing the whole thing to use rock wool and rock panel?
On that email trail, none, which I think probably goes to indicate that we didn't study that email from Rockwool in depth.
Right. What gave you to think that by using Rockwool for the insulation, but sticking with Rainabond PE55 ACM for the rain screen panel, you would get eco-funding?
Because I'd obviously not fully studied and digested Rockwool's email.
Can we look at RYD 408863, please? And put up pages 1 and 2 next to each other. This is an email this is an email. This is an email run on the 16th of June 2016, where we can see on page 2, the base of page 1, and over to page 2, Tom Elliott on the 16th of June 2014, going to Claire and Williams, not copy to anybody. Good morning, Claire, hope you're well. And then he says, I work within Rockwool's refurbishment and regeneration team. And at the top of the next page, he explains various things about the product, same sort of things we've seen earlier. All stone wool insulation comes with a Euro class fire rating of A1, and therefore our systems are particularly suited to high-res refurbishment in accordance with BR 1 through 5. So this is that, and then she pings that on to you on the 16th of June. Simon just had contact from the below FYI. Did it surprise you that Rockwool had contacted Claire Williams directly?
Surprised? No, I think it's a typical sales approach from a major manufacturer.
Yes, and this post-dated the discussions that Zach Maynard and Tom Elliott had been having a few days before, didn't it?
Yes.
So they tried you out and gone now directly to the TMO.
Yes.
Yes. Were you surprised that they'd done that?
No.
No. Do you know how that came about? How did Tom Elliott get Claire Williams' details? Do you know?
No, I don't know. I would imagine it's not very hard to find.
You see this because she pings it onto you the same morning of the 16th of June. You could see from that, could you, that she could see from Mr. Elliott's email that Rockwool Insulation had an A1 fire rating.
I can see that now, but I would imagine, and then you will have to ask Claire herself, but I would imagine Claire's done the same thing as the rest of us, seen a sales email come in and has not picked it apart word for word and understood exactly everything that's said.
Right. Now, we'd already seen that Mr. Elliott had made it clear in his previous emails that it was the entire system, including the rain screen material, which was relevant to obtaining grant funding, didn't we? We needed Rockwool and Rock Panel. So when you told Claire Williams that the query was relevant to the insulation for grant funding, as we see in the top email there, that was only half right, wasn't it? Because you had been told in Mr. Elliott's email of the 10th of June that the only insulated rain screen cladding system itself which could attract eco funding was Rock Panel.
Yes, which I think goes to show that we didn't fully digest the emails.
Do you agree that you should have made it clear to the TMO that in order to get grant funding at all, you needed to use mineral wool and Rock Panel together as a system?
Had I digested their emails fully and understood that, then yes, I would have done.
Right. Did you have any further discussion with Claire Williams about this email run after the 16th of June?
I don't recall. There was a lot of conversations and a lot of routes that were explored regarding eco funding.
Right. Can I then go to HAR 405834? This is a day or two later, where on page 1, if we look at the second email, you write to Mark Harris on the 18th of June. Hi, Mark, following our discussion about Green Deal installers, I've had a conversation with Tom Elliott of Rockwool, see bottom email, which is what you send on to him. You send the email chain we've just been looking at with Claire Williams on to Mark Harris. And you say, I've given him your details to discuss products and how it will fit within the grant funding. He seems very helpful, as you would expect when trying to sell a product, but also knows about grant funding. We may need to get a relationship with him and Rydon if any grant funding is to be achieved. He could also be a very good contact for all of us in the future, as he only deals with the occupied tower block work, so we'll know probably before any of us who's getting work done. Just looking at the relationship point there, what did you mean by a relationship with Rockwool and Rydon? What did you envisage?
Well, at this stage, I'm still on the opinion that we're just talking about insulation here. I believe so.
Right.
Obviously, Rydon is being, and depending on the date, is being discussed and shown to planners, etc., etc. So if you can take Rockwool's grant funding and their product and use it with Rydon, as we know worked previously, and still get grant funding, then that's the optimum solution and the quickest program-wise, etc.
Right, but you knew that was impossible at that stage, didn't you?
I didn't know that was impossible. I was asking them to explore whether that was possible or not.
I follow. All right. Then pursuing that a bit further, we can see an email on the same day at RYD 409105. And here I think we see you writing to Tom Elliott, putting him in touch with Harley, and you say this, please find my contact details below, email or mobile is the best to get me on. It would be good if we can sort something out between yourselves and Harley Curtain Walling Limited for this project. Harley Curtain Walling are one of our best supply chain partners, and we have carried out a good number of tower block refurbishments with them. From memory, they probably all have included the use of Rockwool products for the external insulation. Anyway, speak to Mark Harris from Harley's, and if need be, we can all get together for a chat. We can see, if we turn back to HAR 405834 for a moment, where we were a moment ago, Mark Harris tells you that, having been put in touch, he'll provide some feedback. My question is, do you know, or can you remember whether he ever did do that?
I believe he did. I believe there are emails and chains with conversations about green deal installers or the other qualifications that were needed. So yes, I do think there's emails about that.
Did you discuss with Harley changing the cladding products over to Rockwool or Rock Panel, or either of the two?
I don't remember that much in-depth conversation. It was more a sales approach by Rockwool, and I passed on to Harley's, basically saying, please look at it.
Okay. Now let's skip ahead a little bit, because there are other emails, but let's look ahead a little bit to RYD 409380. This is now the 20th of June. And there seems to have been a discussion on the 18th of June. But here we see that Mr. Elliott emails you on the 20th of June 2014 to explain that he'd spoken to Mark Harris at Harley and clarified a number of things. And he says in the first main paragraph there, having spoken to Mark from Harley and explained the situation regarding the 25 years guarantee required in order to attract eco funding, I've checked with our technical department and we won't be able to incorporate the Rydon cladding with our insulation board and still attract a 25-year guarantee. The only option would be to utilise a rock panel board. In summary, the reason for this is that we, Rockwool, cannot guarantee the additional Rydon components, as they're an external company, but Rock Panel are a Rockwool company, and we therefore are willing to take on the risk. And then he says, if we can get Rock Panel to match the zinc effect of the proposed panels and come to some sort of commercial agreement on price, do you think there would be an interest from yourselves and the client to alter the specification? We would obviously keep any price variation to a minimum, and the additional eco-funding may help to keep the costs in line with the client's budgets. Now that solution was then taken up, I think, in RYD 409673. This is an email of the 24th of June to Zach Maynard, which shows Mark Harris's response to various questions in red. And if we go to item 12, and this email is copied to you, as you can see, on page 1, but if we go to page 2 and item 12, we can see the question or the topic is Rockwool duo slab insulation to be used to ensure eco funding secured on the project. We have been contacted by Rockwool in this regard. They advise that unless they supply the cladding panels, rails and insulation as a complete system, eco-funding would not be available to the client on this project. Whilst we're happy to use Rockwool as an insulation product, our bid is based on using Rydon panels and aluminium rails from a supplier yet to be confirmed. I'm not sure where we go with this. Now, as I say, you were copied into that email. Do you recall receiving it, do you think?
I don't recall that specific one, but yes, I did. And
right.
Yeah,
do you remember whether you asked Harley to do a cost comparison between a system with Rydon and Celotex PIR as opposed to Rockwool and Rock Panel?
If there was I don't recall one. If there was a request, it wouldn't have come from me.
Right.
Probably anyway. It probably would have come from commercial department, so Zach and or one of the others.
Do you know from your involvement in this whether a cost comparison between one system, so Rydon and Celotex PIR on the one hand and Rockwool and Rock Panel as another system, plus eco-funding on the other, was done?
No, I don't know. Don't know if it was.
Is there any reason? We haven't seen anything to indicate that it was done. Can you explain why that is?
No.
Right. Moving forward in the story to the 2nd of July 2014, RYD 3011229. This is an email from Tom Elliott of Rockwool to you, I think pushing you on a bit. Second email down on that page. Hi Simon, hope you are well. Did you manage to resolve the situation with your appropriate guarantee and rain screen system? I'd still like to try and arrange a meeting at some point to see if we can get some projects up and running in the future. Are you free next week? Simon Lawrence, back to Tom Elliott. Afternoon, Tom. Our energy brokers feel that there is a way around the whole system scenario, so shouldn't affect the ability to receive funding, apparently. And then you could talk about a meeting there. When was this discussion with your energy broker that you mentioned in this email? Do you remember?
I know we talked to various brokers, for a better term, around how else energy funding could be achieved.
Right.
So there was probably 3 or 4 different energy specialists that we were talking to.
Was one of them Dave Brissenden?
Yes.
Okay. Was Dave Brissenden the energy broker who had expressed the opinion you were passing on to Tom Elliott here?
I don't know. It could be one of, like I say, I think there was about 3 or 4 of them.
Right. When you were, as you say here, considering or discussing with them a way around the whole system scenario, was any consideration given either by you or the energy brokers, so far as you could tell from talking to them, about fire performance of the full system?
No. I think the energy funding is relating to generally to thermal performance.
Right. Is it fair to say that at this point, early July 2014, it was looking like Rockwool was pretty unlikely to be used on this project as the insulation?
I would have said it's probably fair, yeah.
Yes.
But not for definite, but probably fair.
Right. And was that because in order to get grant funding, you would have had to have used it with rock panel as opposed to Rydon?
Yes. I mean, we at that time, in July, we had, I believe, discussions with planners going on with lots of different options of colours and mock-ups, etc., etc. We then had the grant funding to investigate, which we were with, like I say, 3 or 4 different energy brokers. So there was quite a lot going on. So to take what I class as a sales email from a quite a hard sales email, because he's persistent, basically saying change the whole system, come to us. We had quite a lot of balls in the air, so to speak, at that stage. So whilst we looked into it, we weren't going to drop all the other progress just to focus on one sales email from one manufacturer.
To what extent was your reluctance to embrace the Rockwool rock panel and eco-funding option, if I can use an expression, driven by your reluctance to give up using Rydon PE55 ACM as the rain screen material?
There was no reluctance relating to relationship or Rydon as a material itself. It was more of a time pressure and the amount of work that would be needed to completely change a system again. So the design intent had already progressed through to stage D, stage E, as we spoke about the other day. So there's been a lot of work gone to date to get it to a scheme. We were then spending a lot of time changing that scheme to fit the client's budget, to then add in another option in the mix, along with everything else that was going on, is quite complex.
Now, can I ask you to look at RYD 3013698? This is an email from Jason Bethel to you, copy to Zach Maynard, dated the 25th of July 2014. And it's a response to an email from you to him on the 24th of July. And he says, Simon, please find attached the revised material, only eco-funding insulation cost, including the access equipment as requested. Why did you request that? Do you remember?
I don't remember this email chain at all.
Let's look at the let's look at the attachment that he put on that email. It's RYD 3013699, and I'd like the native version of that, please. Now, help me with this document. It looks as if it's showing that the cost of the insulation for the whole tower, Grenfell Tower, was a total of £187,931.50p, including Rydon's margin of 12.5%. Is that correct?
That appears correct, yes.
Right. Now, you had as we've seen, I think, a contractual obligation to suggest economically viable amendments to the works, which, if instructed as a change, may result in an improvement to the environmental performance in carrying out the works or the completed works. You remember that? I mean,
I don't remember it, but yes, okay.
Okay, and therefore, would you accept that if a product is attracting eco-funding, it may well result in an improvement in the environmental performance as well as cost?
It could do.
Did you ever get as far as discovering what the cost of using Rockwool's insulation with or without the rock panel was?
Not that I recall, no.
Given that you had a contractual obligation to check if the Rockwool system was economically viable, can I ask you to explain why you didn't look at that?
But I'm not sure I can explain. But are you implying that we should look at every product on the market and market test every product?
Well,
is that what?
I'm asking you a question based on your, as in Rydon's contractual obligation to suggest economically viable amendments, which, if accepted, might result in an improvement in environmental performance. And given the use of the Rockwool system, at least was marketed as doing so, my question is, why did you never investigate whether adopting the Rockwool system was economically an advantage?
I don't know.
I'd like to move forward in time a little bit to October 2014, and still sticking with the Rockwool story at the moment. We talked about Mr. Brissenden earlier. Can I ask you to look at RYD 3021252? And this is an email from you to Mr. Brissenden, David Brissenden, on the 15th of October 2014, copied, among others, to David Gibson and Claire Williams. And if you look at the totality of it, it refers to a conversation and an email from the previous week, and it's got topics and answers. And I think your answers are in blue. Is that right? We can look at the email below it if you like. Right. Now, you've provided information in there about the project in your continued attempts to procure eco-funding. So first of all, can we take it that even at this stage, October 2014, you're still looking at getting eco-funding for the rain screen system, the cladding system?
We're looking at eco-funding for the whole building, not just the cladding system. That also involved the communal heating plant, etc. So yes. Yes,
I follow. Now, about 2/3 of the way down, a big block of text in the middle of that page, in black, it says EWI specs, ideally U value of the product material specs. You see that?
Yes.
And then the blue is the external cladding is an aluminium rain screen, Rayno bond, with 160 millimetres Rockwool external wall insulation behind. Average U value to achieve 0.15. Flat roof or pitched, and the answer in blue, flat roof around and on plant room, it has been previously insulated. This isn't part of our scope of works. When you said 160 millimetres Rockwool external wall insulation behind, that wasn't right, was it?
No, I think that's a typo.
A typo? Okay. All right, so that was a mistake.
I think it's a mistake.
Okay. How far along had your discussions with Rockwool progressed at this point?
Without going back to the emails and knowing the date sequence, I believe you've got all the emails any correspondence with Rockwool, so I think it probably had stopped at the last email that we'd seen. But
Right. Now, you say that Rockwool there as a reference is a mistake.
I think that's just a pure mistake, yeah.
Right. Did either David Gibson or Claire Williams or indeed Nick Valente, who is Artelia, pick you up on that mistake?
I don't believe so.
No. Then can I turn to a different topic, which is Harley RFI? And I'd ask you to start, please, with me by looking at RYD 30188154. And page 3 in that email run, please. That's an email from Daniel Anketel-Jones to you, Simon O'Connor, Neil Crawford and Bruce Soanes, the 17th of September 2014. And in it, he refers to and attaches RFI 001, he says, which relates to the requirements of fire breaks. And he goes on to say, this may be something that has already been decided or may need confirmation from the local fire officer, as the opinion tends to vary. You see that?
Yes.
We can see that there's well, we can't see from this email that there was an attachment, but there was. Did you read the attachment?
I can't recall, but it was probably a standard RFI template sheet from Harley's.
Right. Let's have a look. If you go to HAR 403616, please. That's, I imagine, what you're referring to as a standard RFI template sheet
Yes.
from Harley's.
Yep.
This is number 1, 17th September 2014. You can see the date on the right-hand side. Date answer is required, 26th September 2014. And then the query is, please may you confirm the required extent of the horizontal fire breaks within the cladding areas. And then suggested solution. We believe that they will be required at every floor level on the vertical columns, but not in the area of cladding between windows. This is because there is no chimney effect here, and therefore the cladding will not add to the spread of fire. Now, were you conscious at the time that you personally didn't have the expertise to advise on the extent of the horizontal fire breaks within the cladding areas?
Yes, I was conscious.
And were you conscious that Rydon as a company didn't have the in-house expertise to advise on the extent of horizontal fire breaks within the cladding areas?
Yes.
We know, and I think you've told us, that Rydon were relying on Harley to advise on the appropriate design for the facade, including the cavity barriers.
Yes.
I mean, that is, I should be clear for you, that is what the Rydon company statement says at paragraph 390, and you agree with that, I think.
Yes.
But here is it right that we see here your specialist subcontractor on whom you say you were relying asking you for an answer to this question?
Well, they're asking. Excuse me. They're asking Studio E, but referencing myself. So they're asking Studio E if they agree with their assumptions on the cavity barriers.
When you say they're asking Studio E, That, are you referring to the request for information form or the email to which it was attached?
Well, both, because I think Studio E, I wouldn't answer. That is not for me to answer or for me to be able to answer. I would take that and pass that straight to Studio E for their comment, and then if needed, building controls comment.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, we've seen from the email, and I showed you this, that the email went to you and Simon O'Connor, but also Neil Crawford and Bruce Soames.
Yes.
So, was it your understanding that although the RFI came to you, in fact,
Yes.
your understanding was that it would be Studio E who would answer it?
Yes, as I think we saw an example of which yesterday or the day before.
Did you have any thoughts at the time about whether Studio E might have been able to respond fully and professionally?
I didn't have any negative thoughts about that. I would expect them to, as is usual with design as it moves forward. There's quite often interpretations and discussions between designers. So, yeah, I would expect Studio E as a lead architect to be able to look at it and say, yeah, I agree, or no, I don't agree, or let's go and get it checked.
Did you have any discussion with Studio E about whether they were capable or qualified or able to answer this question?
Not as direct as that, no.
Less directly?
Well, and the assumption that they're contracted to do so, and that they are a lead designer and a professional architect, I would expect them to be able to comment on these, even if it is we need to seek further advice.
Did it cross your mind that you may have needed to seek advice from a specialist third-party fire safety engineer in order to answer this question?
It crossed my mind that we would probably end, well, at the time, that it would probably end up at building control and to understand their interpretation.
I see. So even on receipt of this information, let me just see if I can understand your thought process here. On receipt of this information, did you think building control can answer this, or did you think, actually, this is something for Studio E?
I saw it as Studio E to deal with.
Right.
But whether they could answer, I can't answer for them if they can answer that specific question, or whether they
Indeed.
would need it clarified further by another party.
Right. Now, if you go to the email we looked at earlier, the RYD 000018154, which is the email run we were on. We were on page 3, where the RFI was attached, and we can see from the next email up on page 3 and running on to page 2. It starts on page 2 that on the 18th of September, Neil Crawford passes this RFI on to Terry Ashton, copied to you and Simon O'Connor. Do you see that?
Yes.
And he asks Mr. Ashton, as we can see from the top of page 3, can you comment on the RFI attached and whether you believe this interpretation in relation to stack effect is correct? Regards, Neil. Were you surprised at this point in the project, so some 3 months or so after construction had actually started on site, that Studio E was seeking clarification on this matter from Exova?
When you say construction started on site, we were doing enabling works. So, yes, construction had started.
Yeah.
I don't believe any of the cladding or any of that had started. So,
right.
just to clarify that, because
Well, we're following up on...
at the time, I'm not even sure if I would have necessarily seen it and read it before Neil passed it on, or had any more thoughts about it than that, to be fair.
Well, should this kind of question not have been resolved before even the enabling works had been started?
As to what fire breaks needed in the cladding?
Yeah.
When the cladding wasn't installed or the design wasn't fully complete?
Well, that's the question. The design wasn't fully complete.
I would say that's commonplace in my experience in construction process, that you often start before the design, the complete design for the whole whole building is fully developed, signed off and finished. I think that's
Right.
I think that's
So you had no concerns about the timing of this question. Did the fact that Mr. Crawford was sending this message to Mr. Ashton at Exova and asking him to comment not ring alarm bells with you that neither your specialist subcontractor Harley nor your architect knew the answer to this question?
at the time. No, I didn't really like that. No.
Did it not occur to you that, in fact, you ought now to be instructing Exova as a fire consultant?
No, because building control was still. There was still the option to go to building control and ask them to explain or give advice on the regulations and positions of fire breaks.
I see. So even though as we saw yesterday, by this time, which is mid-September, we had, I think, 4 occasions of meetings when you had said you were looking at either using Exova going forward or appointing a fire specialist. Remember the meetings where that kept being said.
Which we were considering for the lower 4 floors, but yes.
But even with that qualification, which I understood you made yesterday, of course, did this exchange and the fact that Neil Crawford was going to Mr. Ashton, to answer the question, not trigger with you a thought, oh, well, perhaps we should be instructing a specialist fire engineer, as we have been looking at through the year so far?
No.
Why is that?
And because it's still the answer hadn't been fully resolved, it had not been fully explored. They'd still not gone to building control at this stage.
In his response on page 2, if we just scroll back to that, please, Mr. Ashton comes back to Mr. Crawford the same day and says, and you're not copied in on this, Neil, I've never seen details of what you're doing to the external walls. Do you have any cross-sections / elevations? And Neil Crawford goes back to Terry Ashton the same day, again, not copied to you, and says, hi Terry, please see our sections and the initial drawings set we had from Harley's. The initial drawings from Harley's are fairly limited, but they attempt to establish the basic approach. Did you discover, or even though you're not copied in on this email, the fact that Terry Ashton had never seen any detail of the external wall construction?
I'm not sure I'd have read all the emails in the chain if I was eventually copied into that. So no, I wasn't. I hadn't picked up on that point. No.
Well, we can pursue the email chain a little bit further, because we do see that you see these a little bit later on that day. Let's just pursue this a little further. If you go to a little bit higher up the page, we can see the email that Daniel Anketel Jones sends to Neil Crawford on the 18th of September 2014 at 16:03, and this time you're copied in. I'm so sorry, I'm taking the wrong one, actually. It's the one below that. The email of the 18th of September from Neil Crawford back to Daniel Anketel Jones, where he sends out the correspondence below. You see that?
Yes.
Do you remember whether you saw the attachments to the email that Neil Crawford had sent?
I don't recall.
Right, well, let's see if we can find one of those. EXO 50710. This is a drawing 1279 SEA number 6, 120, and you get that from the bottom right-hand corner in the usual way. And this is detailed section 1. And if you look at the left-hand side, if we can blow it up a third of the way up, it shows the insulation. It's about a third of the way up from the bottom. If we can just turn that up and if we can expand it, it shows the insulation and refers to the specification H92776. Do you see that?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Ashton, it doesn't seem, was sent the NBS specification at this point, which identified Celotex FR5000. Was he, as far as you could tell?
I don't know, but if that's what it's showing.
Do you know from your own knowledge whether Mr. Ashton had already been provided with the NBS specification so that he could look at it?
Well, I would, going back to originally, I would have assumed so, because of Exover's report within the tender documents, but reading this now, then potentially not.
Right. You say because of Exover's report, that's issue 3, 7th November
Yes.
2013, within the tender documents, but you had no way of knowing whether Mr. Ashton, who'd authored that document, had actually been provided with the NBS spec at the date that it was produced?
No, I think we covered this.
We covered this yesterday. So can we take it that you, when you saw this, didn't think, well, I better be sure that Mr. Ashton has got the spec as well?
I'm not sure I'd be. In fact, I'm sure that I wouldn't be covering the email exchange as closely as possibly I could have done. At the moment, the email exchange is between two of the design team, copying me in and Simon O'Connor in,
Yeah.
keeping us informed as I discussed. But
Right. Going back, if we can, please, to page 1 of the email chain. We just go back to that, which is RYD 3018154. We can see on page 1, you're copied in, as we've just seen, to the response from Neil Crawford, Daniel Plessy correspondence relating to RFI 1 cavity barrier requirement below. You see that?
yes,
Were you, and you can see from the earlier correspondence lower down that he hadn't been provided with the external wall construction. Did that concern you? Were you concerned when you discovered that Mr. Ashton hadn't been provided at any stage with the detail of the external wall composition?
it concerns me now because I've only just found out. It's post the file. I hadn't noticed that previously.
It was in the email chain you got.
That doesn't mean to say I've noticed it, does it? Unfortunately, I'd like to say that.
All right. Okay. Does that tell us that you didn't address your mind to the question at the time as to whether Terry Ashton should now immediately be provided with the external wall build-up?
Correct,
Yeah.
because I hadn't noticed it.
Right. Now, if we turn to the third email in that chain from the top, bottom of page 1, this is prior to you seeing it, it's the last one before you're copied in, same day. Terry Ashton to Neil Crawford. Neil, if the insulation in the cavities behind the rain screen cladding is combustible, you will need to provide cavity barrier as shown on your drawing, he refers to the drawing, in order to prevent fire from spreading from one flat to one above, even if there isn't a continuous cavity from the top to the bottom of the building. You then see that email in the copy a few minutes later, because it's copied on. Did you at the time notice this email exchange and what he's saying about combustibility?
No.
Did it occur to you that combustible insulation might not be permitted behind the rain screen on this project?
I didn't know, and it didn't occur to me because I hadn't read that email.
Right.
Or digested that email.
Does it follow that at this stage you had given no thought and were not alerted to the fact that the guidance in approved document B required the insulation in this external build-up to be of limited combustibility, as defined?
No, because I think, as we've previously mentioned, I'm relying on third parties to understand that information on behalf of Rydon or on behalf of myself, because we haven't got that expertise.
I know you can't remember opening the drawings that we looked at a moment ago, but do we take it from that you didn't notice that the drawing did not include the provision of cavity barriers around the window openings?
No, I didn't notice.
I mean, is there a reason why you were not interested enough to open the drawings and examine them?
I think interest enough's unfair.
Right.
I think that there are lots of email correspondence that goes between design parties, whether it be subcontractors and excuse me, and the architect. For me to excuse me, open every single one of them, digest them, fully understand them, comment on every single one of them. When I've got two technical people having a discussion, then no, I don't think it's possible to open every single email,
Right.
fully digest it, fully understand it.
Yeah. So, I'm sorry, Mr. Lawrence, I don't mean to be unfair to you, but
Sorry.
the reason I asked the question is because from the TMO's perspective, and given the contract you have with the TMO, it would suggest that they would expect you to open every drawing and be interested, because you had promised to do what you promised in your contract.
Okay.
That's why I asked the question. Now, did you notice the fact that, well, can we ask you this? Are you familiar with approved document B, and particularly section 9 and diagram 33?
No.
No. Now, did you notice the fact that Mr. Ashton didn't comment on the absence of cavity barriers directly below or to the side of the windows
No.
or in the crown area?
No.
No. Did you make any assumption, one way or the other, that the drawings were correct?
No.
Now, looking at the very top of this email, that again you're copied into this time, Neil, this is from Daniel Anketell-Jones to Neil Crawford. Neil, thank you for your response. The insulation is class 0. Therefore, after reading the correspondence below, I believe that the fire barrier in these locations will not be necessary. Can you confirm that this is acceptable? Just focusing on the insulation is class 0, did that statement register with you at the time?
Not particularly, no.
Right. Were you aware, or conscious, perhaps is a better word, of the guidance in ADB paragraph 12.7 that in a building with stories of 18 metres or more above ground level, any insulation product used in the external wall construction had to be, or should be, as the guidance says, of limited combustibility?
No.
No. Does it follow from that that Mr. Anketell-Jones, does it follow from that it didn't occur to you that Mr. Anketell-Jones had perhaps misunderstood, and that had misunderstood specifically the difference between class 0 and limited combustibility?
It didn't occur to me. It's a technical conversation between two designers. So no.
Can we then just carry on with this in the chronology? If you look at SEA 3011730 and put pages 1 and 2 up together, this is an email chain between Neil Crawford and Terry Ashton, also on the 18th of September 2014, and you were copied in on this, if we look at the top of page 1. We can see at the top of page 2, which is the next item up after the one we've been looking at, where he says, Terry, is this interpretation correct? So you can see that Neil Crawford checked Daniel Anketell-Jones of Harley's advice with Terry Ashton on Exova and asks that question. And then if you go to the foot of page 1, we can see Terry Ashton's response back to Neil Crawford. You see that?
Yes.
You're not copied in on that, but you are copied in on the next email, which comes from Neil Crawford back to Terry. And at the foot of page 1, Terry Ashton says, a material which has a class 0 rating is not necessarily non-combustible, although the reverse is invariably true. Some class 0 products will burn when exposed to a fully developed fire. In any case, you need to prevent fire spread from one flat to the flat above, as I stated in my earlier email. What isn't clear from the information to hand is whether or not there is a continuous cavity from top to bottom in any part of the cladding apart from around the column casings, irrespective of the type of insulation. And we can see that although you don't get that email, you do get the response, as I say, because you're copied into that. When you saw that email chain, did you read Mr. Ashton's email to Mr. Crawford that I've just read out to you?
I recall it from prepping for this, but
Right.
at the time I don't recall it.
All right. Do you remember, did you make anything at the time of the statement that a class naught material was not necessarily non-combustible?
No, because I don't recall
Right.
reading it and digesting it.
Okay, so it didn't trigger anything with you at the time?
No, because I don't recall reading it or digesting it.
Do you... Now, Ashton says in his email to Neil Crawford that he didn't have sufficient information to hand to see whether or not there is a continuous cavity from top to bottom in any part of the cladding apart from round the column casings. I know you don't recall reading this email chain, but do you recall having any concern at all at the time that Mr. Ashton did not have sufficient information to be able to determine the extent of the wall cavity?
No, because I'd not seen it and digested it and noted it.
Right. After this email was copied to you later on the same afternoon, did you do any further investigation to satisfy yourself that the insulation was compliant with the building regulations?
No.
Given that it was Rydon's contractual responsibility to ensure that the insulation was compliant with the building regulations, who did you consider was responsible for making sure that that obligation was complied with?
I would expect Harley to do the design. I would expect Studio E to check that design to the best of their knowledge, and I would expect then Studio E to take that to building control and have a conversation with building control.
And the same question in respect of the design of the cavity barriers.
Yes. Yep.
And do you take it that because you were relying on them and trusted them from your experience, you didn't take any steps yourself to ensure that they were discharging that responsibility?
I think by all the email trails they were
Right.
seeking that advice.
So you took it from the email trails that they were.
I've seen all the email trails obviously since. I've reread them all since, but that we know that there was conversations with Studio E, ourselves at times, building control, Harley's. So by the fact that everybody was talking and advice was being shared backwards and forwards, I believe that they were doing what they should be doing.
Right. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to turn to a different topic, slightly different topic. I know we're a couple of minutes early, but
that would be a good point.
We're well on track, so if we may.
Okay. Before we break, Mr. Lawrence, can I just ask you this? I get the impression from that range of answers you gave in respect of the emails that you had a huge amount of email traffic passing across your computer, and perhaps, in your view, neither the time or, dare I suggest, the inclination to read it all in detail. Would that be a fair?
Yeah, I wouldn't say inclination, because if I obviously had the time, I would love to study every single email. But yes, there is a lot of email traffic, not just on this project, on other projects, and a lot of subjects being discussed.
Yeah.
So yes, for me to understand technically between two designers and get involved in that from a technical perspective, yeah, I wouldn't.
I wonder whether you felt that you had enough support. In other words, whether you had an assistant who could perhaps spend a bit more time than you could looking into the emails and the attachments and so on.
Well, we had the site team, and obviously Simon O'Connor was the project manager based on site, so he would have seen and been involved in that. But again, I don't think when it comes to technical design that apart from our input on coordination and buildability, if we could input on that, I wouldn't be pulling the regs apart, pulling the all the email trails apart and understanding all that. No.
Yeah. I mean, do you think you had enough support? Is really what I'm asking you.
I think it's typical of typical of the job. Well, I'd always love another 20 people. Everybody would always love another 20 people.
Well, I was thinking one more person, to be honest.
I think there was a full team there, so yeah.
All right, thank you. Well, we'll have a break now for some lunch.
Thank you.
Please remember not to talk to anyone about your evidence or the matters relating to it. And we'll resume at 2 o'clock, please.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to go to the usher, please. Right, 2 o'clock, please. Okay.